You know, Rav Nachman of Breslov is famous for Rav Nachman of Breslov is famous for a line. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar meod. The whole world is a very narrow bridge. V'ha'ikar, and the main thing, is lo lefached klal. Not to be afraid at all. There were two things that always challenged me. First of all, by the way, that's not exactly what he said. It just fit better into the song. What he actually said was that the main thing is lo lehitpached klal. Not to allow yourself to become afraid. So, there were always two questions I had. First thing is, what does it mean that the whole world is a narrow bridge? You know, I tell a famous story. One of the Rabbis of Bavov, and he was nearing his end. He was very sick. And you know how it is, the Rebbe gets sick, all the Hasidim come, they're all around his bed, and they're hanging on to every last word. And you know how it is, the Gabayim, the ones who are the super duper close to him students, almost rabbi themselves, are right around him. And the ones that are like, you know, not quite on a higher level, they're a little further away. And all the way at the end, you know, the newbies, the guys who are in the yeshiva for the first year. So one of the Alta Bachrim, you know, the older students, leans close to the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, what is the meaning of life? I don't know about you. If I was on my deathbed and somebody asked me the meaning of life, I'd punch him. But okay, it's a Hasidic story, right? So the Rebbe says, life is like a river. Psh. So the Hasid, you know, you can barely hear him. He's dying. So the Chassid turns and says, life is like a river. What did he say? Life is like a river. Life is like a river. It passes down. Life is like a river. What did the Rebbe say? Life is like a river. Gets all the way down to the end. There's a new guy, you know, he's only been in yeshiva for a week. And they tell him, the Rebbe says, life is like a river. So he says, why is life like a river? That's a good question. Why is life like a river? Why is life like a river? Why is life like a river? Goes all the way back up. Why is life like a river? Gets back to the Rebbe. Rebbe, why is life like a river? So the Rebbe says, so it's not like a river. Why is life like a bridge? And why is it a narrow bridge? You know, a bridge is not where you go. It's not your destination. It's just a means of getting to your destination. When you think that this is the goal, that's when you get into trouble. We get mixed up. We think the purpose is the job or the money. That's just a vehicle. Where are we headed? Where are we going? And if the bridge is narrow, then anyone you bump into on the way, you have to meet, you have to think about it. Everything that comes into your life, it comes on a narrow bridge. It's part of what you're meant to be and what you're meant to be doing. But what does it mean? That the main thing is not to be afraid. I never understood that. I thought the main thing is when you're afraid, do what you have to do. That's called courage. How could you not be afraid? You know, I actually remember a very specific moment. It's a longer story, but I'll tell you the short version. I'm sitting here alive today, absolutely without question, among many other things because of a Bedouin tracker named Makbul. And the Israeli army uses these guys. They're unbelievable. They can see things you and I would never see. Every patrol that you ever hit, in Lebanon, and for that matter, Gaza Strip, there's always a clean area, swept, clean, you know. And when you're on patrol, the tracker, and they learn how to do this because as kids they grow up tracking their goats and their camels and whatever. he can see everything. He can see footprints. Okay, you and I can see footprints. He can tell you if the footprints were made by a Jewish shoe or an Arab shoe. He can tell you if the guy was walking forwards or backwards. Really unbelievable. And to make a longer story short, at one point we were on patrol, and he realized something was up. And he screamed out. I still have a vivid image of him standing in the middle of the bath, right? Everybody hit the ground. Everybody hit the ground. Now, if I yelled at you here, everybody hit the dirt. You know, chair's comfortable. What's wrong with this guy? But if you're in Lebanon and they tell you to hit the dirt, you hit the dirt. And at that point, all the things that they've trained you for take over, right? You don't think about it. In the movies, it always looked like the commander is so brave. There's also really, he's so brave music playing. In real life, there's no music. And you do what they've trained you. Hit the ground. You do a Gilgul Krav. You roll out. You don't stand where you were because then you're a target. And everybody knows what they're supposed to do. The radio man is already calling in battalion, and he's telling them that you've been hit, but you don't know exactly what's going on. And everything goes, and it took about 15 seconds. At first, I wasn't sure what was going on because nobody had opened fire on us. He figured out that they had to be in the area based on what he saw. About 15 seconds later, they opened up on us. And at this point, instinct just takes over. You split up your unit into 2 units because that's what they've taught you to do. Everybody already knows which unit they're in. You yell out whatever pkudot, you know. There's a koach that's called a koach retek. They're a cover fire position. Mikubcha, you know, your place is 30 meters over that way. You cover them while they move that way. Then they start to cover you. Then you do what's called kitzur tvachim. You get closer. You leapfrog. I cover you. You cover me. And as this is going on, kind of in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, this is the first time I was ever under serious fire. This is amazing. This is really amazing. Everything they trained us for actually works. And it's just going. Everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. And you don't have time to think about it, and you certainly don't have time to be scared. You're actually much more nervous about messing up. You're the officer if you give the wrong command. And it's all going well until there's this one moment. You're about 30 yards away from where these terrorists are pouring all this fire into you. The cover fire position is doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're pouring an enormous amount of fire into the top of this ridge. Lao anti-tank weapon, RPG, heavy machine gun, everything you can think of. And you've got to give an order, kadima istayer, like charge. And you're basically about to give an order to 5 men who are with you to do something that's nuts. It's nuts. But they've trained you for this so many times, by the time you realize it's nuts, you've just already done it. And you don't actually run up a hill, unlike in the movies. You actually walk quickly so you can all stay in a line. And intellectually, you know that they can't actually hit you. Because the cover fire are doing their job, and they're pouring so much cover, they can't even lift up their heads. And halfway up that very short run, your cartridge runs out of bullets. Now, you're supposed to be firing single shot and conserving, but you're thinking about so many things, your cartridge runs out of bullet. Now, it doesn't really matter because there's 4 other guys next to you and they're firing and the cover fire. But in your mind, you know, you grew up like you have to have bullets in your gun. Now, it takes a soldier worth his salt 1/8 of a second to flip out his cartridge. Every soldier in combat has 2 cartridges taped together or however they do it. And it's a button that you press on your M16 and you flip it out and flip it back in. It takes a second. It is the longest second of your life. You can't fire. You can't stop. You know, you can't give a, can we wait a second? It doesn't work that way. And so you're and it's a moment of sheer terror. Silly me. I should have remembered Rav Nachman. The main thing is not to be, what does that mean? That's ridiculous. And I want you to know, after this event, when everything calmed down, you know what really freaked me out? I was afraid that maybe the next time I would actually freeze. It took way too much energy to give that order and stand up and start walking up that hill. What if you freeze? All these men are dependent on you. What if you feel? And I actually started to get really scared of being scared. And I started to ask people, how do you deal with this? And there was a company commander I was really close with, who I'm still in awe of. He gave me a great piece of advice. He said, you know how I do it? Get mad. Get really angry. Imagine them taking your grandmother and your kids and whatever else it is. They're ransacking Jerusalem and then you get up the hill. So the next time I was in a situation, had to go through a door, wasn't sure what was on the other side, that's what I did. I got myself really mad. And you know what? It worked. You get so mad, the adrenaline just pushes you through the door. And then I realized that the problem with that is that when all the dust settles, you're left with all that anger. That's not healthy. So about maybe a month later, 2 months later, I managed to get back to my yeshiva. I went to Gush at the time. Har Etzion, for anybody who went there, it's an amazing place. And I got back to Gush, and Rav Medan, who was my Rebbe, who's today Rosh Yeshiva, happened to be in yeshiva. And I knew that he had fought in the wars, and I thought maybe he could give me a good answer. So I went over to him and I told him my problem. He said, oh, it's very simple. It's in the Rambam. That's not what I expected to hear. I said, it's in the Rambam, it's in Maimonides. He said, yeah. He opens up Maimonides, Hilchot Melachim, the last set of halachot, the last set of laws in the Rambam's magnum opus. And the Rambam says, what should a soldier fighting in a war that is a mitzvah be thinking? Can you imagine this? He's writing this in the 12th century, caught between the Almohades and the Catholic Church. The Jews were being decimated. And he's talking about one day when the Jewish people come back home and Jewish soldiers are fighting, what should they think about? That's crazy. It took 800 years for him to be proven right. And he says, Yish'an al mikveh Israel. He should rely on the wellspring of Israel. And Rabbi then walked away. Because you got to figure it out on your own. And I finally figured out what it means. You know what fear is? Fear is when you don't know. If you could really know, you would never be afraid. You know, imagine you meet a girl, and she's a great girl. You want to ask her out for dinner. But you're nervous, because what if she disses you? What if she says no? But when I get home from here in Israel and see my wife, and I'll say, you want to go out for a cup of coffee? I'm not afraid. Like I already know, or at least I knew when I left that she loved me. I hope she still does when I get back. If you know, you would never be afraid. You know the best way to deal with fear? Put yourself in bigger hands. You got to do everything you got to do. You don't sit at home and wait for God to handle the enemy. You got to join the army. You got to do what you got to do. If you want to meet the right girl, you got to go dating. If you want to get a degree, you got to go to college. But once you've done what you can do, you got to put yourself in bigger hands. Because if you could really know, you would never be afraid. And it would always work out. A week and a half ago, I was in Poland. I was standing in an empty field in a clearing, surrounded by trees, in a place called Chelmno, where they murdered 200,000 of our brothers and sisters. Unbelievable. And if you would have gone back in time and whispered to those Jews, 75 years later, some of the offspring or relatives would be sitting in a room with 5,000 Jews learning Torah, they'd look at you like you, and here we are. Kol haolam kulo, gesher tzalmeo, gesher tzalmeo, gesher tzalmeo. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. The whole world is Gesher tzar me'od, Gesher tzar me'od. Diddle-a-nay-nay, diddle-a-nay-nay-nay-nay, diddle-a-nay-nay-nay. Just never be afraid. So I'll tell you a very deep Torah. This is a really, you ready for deep? This is deep. So I was in Warsaw. And you don't really get this until you go to this place. It's, we have this image that the Jews didn't fight back. Why didn't they fight back? Why did they go like sheep to the slaughter? I think that's a terrible thing that we think. And I think that the Jewish people is finally coming around to realize that there are many different ways that you resist and you fight back. And some people fought with Sten guns and Molotov cocktails. And some people fought by singing on Imamin when they went into the gas chambers. There were 450,000 Jews in the ghetto in Warsaw. They crammed them into an area that shouldn't have fit more than 20,000 people. They put 4 families, sometimes as many as 20 people, in a room that you would give to just one of your kids. It was freezing cold in the winter. They had no fuel. They had no heating. They ran out of chairs and things to burn. They froze. I remember we were standing in the cemetery in Warsaw at the grave of the Netziv and of Chaim Brisker, 2 great rabbis. And I was freezing. And I was wearing my North Face coat and my thermal gatkes and so many layers of socks and super duper califragilistic rubber boots. And I was freezing. And it was so powerful to be there when it was so freezing, because I kept thinking, how did they survive? And people were dropping like flies. And the Nazis said, no 3 people could gather together in public. And if they caught you singing a Shabbos song, they shot you on the spot. If they caught you learning Torah, they shot you on the spot. And there's a great rabbi. And his name was Rav Konus Kalman Shapira. He's known as the Piazetzner Rebbe. And he was clearly a genius, tremendous Torah scholar. He apparently was able to master any skill or art that he touched. He was a concert violinist. He felt it was important during World War I and the period afterwards to sort of have some knowledge of medicine, so he read medical books. And he was able to prescribe prescriptions for his students. He did something nobody did. He realized that there were no rebbeim for the children. There were thousands of orphans after World War I. They had no one teaching them Torah. They had nowhere to go. So he kicked out all his Hasidim. And he became the Rebbe of the children. They say, if you never saw Lecha Dodi being sung on Friday night in Warsaw, in the orphanages of the Piazetzner, you never saw Lecha Dodi. At the height, he had 8,000 children. 8,000 students. And you know what they did with children during World War II? He gave a secret shir, secret class, and he wrote down his words of Torah, and he hid them in little tin cans. And in 1942, he was taken on one of the last mass transports to Treblinka, and he met his end in the skies over Europe. But of course, true Torah never ends. In 1946, so the legend goes, a Polish kid was climbing through the rubble in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he found a couple of tin cans, a tube with a manuscript. And he opened it up, and he thought it might be something important. Looked like funny letters. So he took it to a U.S. soldier. Figured he'd get something out of it, chocolate bar. And the U.S. soldier, who for sure, if he's not in this world, is in Gan Eden right now, African-American for the U.S. 8th Army, recognized it as probably being Hebrew, and took it to Rav Schechter, who was the chaplain of the U.S. 8th Army. And Rav Schechter read this manuscript and read the following letter in the introduction to the manuscript. He says, if you are reading these words when the war is over, then I must be in the world of truth. Because if I was alive, nothing would have prevented me from coming back to find these words, this holy fire, written in such pain. He says, I don't know if there are any Jews left in Warsaw. I don't know if there are any Jews left in Poland. I don't even know if there are any Jews left in Europe. But I'm sure that there must be Jews left in Palestine. And if you will send these holy words, these words of holy fire, Eish Kodesh, to my brother, the Admor HaChalutz, who's in the small town of Tel Aviv outside of Yafo, then I will pray for you and your family forever. And then he adds a line. He says, if you're standing in Jerusalem and the Jewish people are home, and you are reading this letter published in this book that somehow managed to get published, know that if you will learn the words of Torah in this book, I will pray to God for you and your family forever, and if necessary, I will rise up to the chair and throne of mercy itself to demand justice for you and your family forever. So I'm reading this in the inside cover of a book in Yerushalayim. I figure I got to get this book. And I started learning the Eish Kodesh. Not a simple book. He knows so much, all of Talmud. But he shares the following idea. There's a magnificent verse. Esai Nail Harim, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Me'ayin yavo Ezri, from whence comes my salvation? Ezri me'im Hashem, my salvation comes from Hashem. Oseh shamayim va'aretz, the creator of the heavens and the earth. So he asks a very good question. If you know your salvation comes from God, why does it have to say that God is the creator of heavens and the earth? If you know your salvation comes from God, you know that God created the heavens and the earth. What, God needs a resume? So listen to this. This is so deep. He says, you know, there are different types of troubles that we get into. Sometimes you get into a jam, and you know how you have to get out of it. You're driving a car, you run a red light, there's a truck coming. You say, oh God, please let my brakes work, let his brakes work. You know what has to happen. You just hope it'll happen. But sometimes you get into a jam, you have no idea. You're standing in a plane at 30,000 feet over the Rocky Mountains, and you're leaning against the door, and it accidentally opens, and you fall out. No parachute. You're at 30,000 feet hurtling through space to the Rocky Mountains. What do you pray for? Wings? It's over. He says in those moments, know to who you daven. You're davening to Hashem. Hashem created heaven and Hashem created earth. Hashem created gravity. Hashem created the plane. Hashem created everything. And even when you have no idea how you're going to get out of it, know that Hashem runs the world. And there's always a way out of it. If you would have told the Jews in the trains on the way to Treblinka that 3 years later, they'd be dancing in the streets, declaring a state of Israel, they would have said you were mad. And if we could go back in time and visit those Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto and tell them that 75 years from now, your children's children will be singing these words, they would start crying. And here we are. So if you know this, sing along. Oh yes, Yavo Ezri, Mehi Hashem, Oseh Shomayim Varetz. I'm going to do a little technical. So you can sing along. So do one last niggin, so that the time guy doesn't get stressed. Do one last niggin. So this is absolutely the coolest Adon Olam you will ever hear. And this is about the fact that Adon Olam Hashem Malach is the principles of faith of the Jewish people. Hashem is the Adon of the Olam. That's the theme of this hour. Hashem runs the world. Don't get stressed. Iran is a nuclear missile. HaKadosh Baruch will figure it out. Okay, we gotta wake up before we leave. Hashem Allah b'terem kol yitziniva. You can either sing or clap. V'yetnaseh b'chesro kol hazamen lech shemo nikra. בטל כל יציר נברא ליד נעשה בחפצו כל הזה מלאך שמו נקרא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה תפארה ישראל, השם אלוקינו. השם אחד. Last niggun for the night. Evdu et Hashem besimcha, evdu et Hashem. You can stand up. Oh, lefanav bir nana, lefanav bir nana. No guts, no glory. Evdu et Hashem besimcha, evdu et Hashem besimcha. Oh, lefanav bir nana, lefanav bir nana. Nine, oh, 999, 'Idu et Hashem besimcha, Idu et Hashem besimcha. Kol fanav birnana, fanav birnana. Idu et Hashem besimcha, Idu et Hashem besimcha. Kol fanav birnana, fanav birnana. Nine, here we go, last time. Idu et Hashem besimcha. Hoy bo lefanav birnana. Oh, Idu et Hashem besimcha, Idu et Hashem besimcha. Go lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Nidalai. Oh, nidalai. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Look forward to it again soon. Mazel tov. Thank you.